I thought I knew peace. 30 acres of rolling fields, a few horses, chickens that sounded like tiny screaming engines, and a barn that had survived every storm nature could throw at it. That's when she appeared. Karen. I first noticed her SUV the morning the sun barely hit the horizon. A shiny silver nightmare parked smack in the middle of my driveway. At first I thought, maybe someone's lost. Maybe they need directions. But then she stepped out, striding toward me like she owned the place, clipboard in hand and a look that could curdle milk. "Good morning," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she said slowly, dragging out the word as if savoring it. "You're in violation of HOA rules." I blinked twice. "HOA rules," I repeated, my brain refusing to process what I was hearing. "Ma'am, I live on a farm. There is no HOA here." She tilted her head, as though I had just admitted to stealing the moon. "Oh, there is," she said, nodding as if revealing a secret I should already know. "I'm the Neighborhood Oversight Committee. We make sure properties stay compliant." Compliant. My brain laughed, my gut went cold. Her definition of compliance seemed to involve invading someone else's property and standing there with a clipboard. I tried to reason with her. "Listen, this is private land, you can't." "Oh, I can," she interrupted, "and I will." That's when I noticed the subtle little things. A tiny sticker on her SUV that read, HOA Enforcement, in bold letters. Her shoes were scuffed like she'd been on Mission Impossible, and she had a walk like she expected me to drop to my knees and salute her. I wanted to laugh. I really did. But then she moved her hand to a little notebook, flipping it open like she was about to cite me for war crimes. "Your barn paint color isn't approved," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Your driveway isn't within regulations, and I noticed." She lowered her voice like a conspiracy. "Your rooster is excessively loud." My jaw literally dropped. My rooster, who crowed only at the crack of dawn like a perfectly polite rural alarm clock. Now apparently he was a public nuisance. "Are you serious?" I asked, stepping back toward the barn like maybe it could swallow me whole. "Very," she said. And then she did something that pushed me from disbelief to the edge of anger. She parked her SUV even closer to my barn, blocking my tractor. My tractor, the one thing that actually earns me money, and she didn't even look apologetic. I pinched the bridge of my nose and tried to calm down. I considered walking away. That's what civilized people do, right? But something inside me, something small, petulant, stubborn, snapped. I couldn't just let this continue. Not when she was standing there, clipboard raised like a weapon, daring me to respond. I glanced at her SUV again. Shiny, new, obnoxiously parked. And then I glanced at the barn, the hay, the open fields, and an idea, wild and reckless, started forming in my brain. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just nodded slowly, smiling in a way that I hoped masked my growing plan. Karen, of course, thought she had won, thought she had me cornered. But she didn't know, not yet. Because while she was busy ticking imaginary violations off her clipboard, I was already thinking about the possibilities. I could ignore her, but ignoring a person like Karen only makes them bolder. And I had a feeling she was about to push every boundary she could find. I looked at the driveway, I looked at the SUV, I looked at my land. And somewhere deep down, a tiny, dangerous voice whispered, "She's going to regret this." I smiled at her politely, but it wasn't really a smile. It was a promise. "Enjoy your morning," I said. "I'll see you around." She raised an eyebrow, satisfied like she had already won some invisible battle. And then she turned, climbed into her SUV, and backed out of the driveway, slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the fact that she had annoyed me. I watched her go, my mind already racing. She thought this was over. She thought she could park wherever she wanted, write whatever rules she wanted, and control my farm with a clipboard and attitude. She had no idea what was coming next. Because if Karen wanted a war, she had just parked in the wrong driveway. And I was already planning my first move. I thought Karen's little driveway stunt was a one-time annoyance. I was wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, I found a thick envelope lying on my porch, stamped with big, official-looking letters. HOA. My hands shook slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a letter so absurd, I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. It detailed violations I had never heard of. Barn color, not compliant with neighborhood standards. Driveway alignment inconsistent with community aesthetic. Rooster crowing exceeding permissible decibel levels. I laughed, then I almost cried. Then I reread it. Then I laughed again, but it was one of those bitter laughs that tastes like vinegar. I called the HOA number on the letter. My heart sank when a cheerful woman answered, "Good morning, HOA Compliance Office. How can I help you?" Yes, hello," I said cautiously. "I live on a farm, there's no HOA here. I received this letter." "Oh," she chirped. "Well, we are a community oversight committee, and you are currently listed as out of compliance." I blinked. "Wait, you mean Karen?" "Yes," she said, as if I had solved a great mystery. "Karen handles your property. She's very thorough." I slammed the phone down. Karen handles my property. She wasn't just trespassing with her SUV anymore. She was writing letters, creating rules, inventing fines, and somehow convincing others that I had to follow them. The absurdity of it all hit me as I stepped outside. Her SUV was back, and it wasn't just in the driveway this time. It was half on the gravel, half on my grass, tires perfectly aligned to block my tractor again. I considered moving it. I considered calling the cops. I even considered pretending it didn't exist. But my gut told me that doing nothing would only encourage her. Karen thrived on control. She craved the feeling of power over people who couldn't stop her. I stared at that SUV like it was a ticking time bomb, and in a way, it was. For hours, I paced my barn, imagining all the ways this could escalate. Each time I thought of a plan, it sounded insane. Too insane, even for me. But the longer she stayed on my property, the more I realized I had to do something. Later that day, I peeked through the barn window and saw Karen talking to someone on her phone, pointing at my fields like she was strategizing a military operation. My blood boiled. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was planning, and that meant I had to plan too. I spent the afternoon checking every inch of my land. Each fence post, every corner of the driveway, all the way to the barn. I was looking for weak points, small advantages I could use. And then I found it. A scrap of old wood, a rope from last year's hay delivery, a seed of an idea that started forming in my mind. I laughed to myself, low and quiet, because the idea was so ridiculous that if I told anyone, they'd probably call me insane. But insane or not, I knew one thing. If Karen kept pushing, she was going to regret it. I tried to distract myself by doing farm work. I fed the horses, repaired a fence, and even tried to nap in the barn. But my mind kept going back to her SUV, parked like a monument to her arrogance. Every time I imagined it in a different place, on the road, in the cornfield, upside down, I couldn't help but grin. By evening, I had made a decision. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. No polite move your car signs, no gentle warnings. Karen had escalated, and I would escalate right back. I went to the garage, pulled out tools I hadn't touched in years, and started sketching. Lines, angles, measurements, a plan forming slowly, carefully, like a chessboard coming to life. It was dangerous. It was crazy. It was perfect. And as I put down the pencil, I looked at her SUV, parked defiantly across my driveway, and whispered, "You think you're in charge, Karen, but you have no idea what's coming next." Just as I said it, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. My heart skipped. She was back. She had returned earlier than I expected, and she was smiling. That's when I realized the war had officially begun. Karen had no idea that by the end of this week, her SUV might not be where she left it, and I was about to make sure she found out the hard way. By the third day, it was clear. Karen wasn't going anywhere. In fact, she seemed to be enjoying herself. Like a cat watching a mouse with a particularly long tail, she paraded around my property, clipboard in hand, recording every little thing that didn't suit her imaginary HOA rules. I tried reasoning with her again. Karen, seriously, this is private property, you can't. Ignore the law, she cut me off, voice sharp enough to cut hay. This is community compliance, and your barn roof pitch is unacceptable. I stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. My barn roof, unacceptable. It had survived 10 years of storms, hail, and one particularly angry goat. But apparently, Karen's HOA handbook, printed in her garage on neon-colored paper, said otherwise. The next few hours passed like a weird, twisted nightmare. I watched her strut around, making notes on everything. Fence posts leaning slightly, my tractor parked too close to the barn, even the chickens wandering near the edge of the property. At one point, she stopped to measure the rooster's perch. I swear she had a little tape measure for it. I wanted to scream, I wanted to laugh, I wanted to run inside and hide, but none of that would solve anything. And deep down, a tiny, dangerous voice whispered, "She's asking for it." That's when I noticed something unusual. Karen wasn't just being a busybody, she was confident, too confident, like she knew there was nothing I could do. And confidence in people like Karen is dangerous. It needs to be broken. I spent the rest of the morning thinking. Signs didn't work, warnings didn't work, motion sprinklers didn't work, and calls to actual authorities, completely useless. Karen had built her own little kingdom, right here on my farm, and I was the trespasser in my own story. By noon, I had had enough. I needed a plan, something big, something that would finally make her understand that she couldn't just park wherever she wanted and pretend it was law. Something unforgettable. I started small at first. I moved objects subtly, hopping to inconvenience her just a little. A garden gnome here, a wheelbarrow there, she noticed. Oh, she noticed, but she adapted. She was relentless, adaptable like a machine, and machines can't feel fear, but people feel fear eventually. I spent that evening walking the property, inspecting every corner, every tool, every scrap of wood. That's when I noticed an old pile of hay bales in the far corner of the field, and I stopped. The idea hit me so fast I almost dropped the hammer I was holding. A catapult, yes, a catapult, medieval style, big, dangerous, ridiculous, and yet perfect. I laughed out loud. I knew it sounded insane. But every time I imagined Karen's face when she realized her precious SUV might no longer be exactly where she left it, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. And if I was being honest, a little nervous too. I called my friend Earl, the only person I could trust not to tell the authorities immediately. "Earl," I said, my voice trembling with excitement, "we're building a catapult." He paused, then laughed. A loud, booming, slightly maniacal laugh. "I thought you were joking." "Nope," I said. "I've got hay, wood, and ropes. Tomorrow morning we start." Earl whistled. "This is either genius or we're going to jail." I smiled, possibly both. The next morning, I watched Karen return to her SUV, clipboard in hand, humming a little tune like she owned the world. I bit my lip. She had no idea what was coming. Not even a clue. I went to the barn, grabbed the blueprints I'd hastily sketched the night before, and started gathering materials. Each plank, each rope, each hay bale brought me closer to the moment when I would finally reclaim my farm. But even as I worked, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was stepping into dangerous territory. What if it failed? What if she caught me before I was ready? What if worse? I glanced at the SUV through the barn window. Shiny, oblivious, parked like a monument to her arrogance. My blood boiled. My hands shook, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from anticipation. I whispered to myself, low and deadly serious, "She doesn't know it yet, but this is going to be the last time she parks on my farm." And then, just as I was about to pick up a particularly heavy plank, I heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel. Karen was back. She had returned earlier than expected. My heart raced as I watched her step out, clipboard in hand, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying: she was watching me. By the fourth day, I knew things had gone way beyond polite warnings or subtle annoyances. Karen was now treating my farm like a personal playground, measuring my fence posts, taking notes on the grass, and occasionally glancing at me like I was some sort of minor inconvenience in her grand HOA empire. I could feel my patience snapping like an old rope in a storm. I tried reasoning with her one last time. Karen, this is private property, you can't just— Oh, I can, and I will, she interrupted, clipboard raised like a sword. Community compliance comes first. I stared at her for a long moment, my brain refusing to process the absurdity. Then something inside me clicked. Something small, reckless, and maybe a little crazy. If she wants war, she's going to get it. I spent the evening packing the barn, staring at tools, old wood, and stacks of hay bales. Ideas bounced around in my head like ping-pong balls in a storm. Then it hit me. A catapult. A proper, medieval-style catapult that could, theoretically, launch anything from a hay bale to, well, let's say a little demonstration for Karen's SUV. I laughed quietly to myself, because I knew how insane it sounded. I was a farmer, not some medieval siege engineer. But when I imagined Karen's smug face if her SUV ended up somewhere other than my driveway, my pulse quickened, and a thrill of mischievous excitement ran through me. I called my friend Earl. Earl is the kind of guy who thinks OSHA rules are suggestions, and who welds metal like it's finger painting. He answered on the third ring. Earl, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, we're about to get medieval. There was a pause. What? I'm building a catapult, I said, and I need your help. Another pause, then laughter, loud, booming, borderline maniacal. You've officially lost it, but I'm in, let's do it. By dawn the next day, we were gathering supplies. Ropes, planks, metal scraps, hay bales, anything that could help. I sketched designs on scrap paper while Earl measured angles and muttered about leverage, trajectory, and something he called sweet, sweet physics. The work was exhausting. My arms ached from lifting beams, my hands were raw from rope. The sun beat down mercilessly, but I barely noticed. My mind was focused on one thing: Karen's SUV, that shiny silver monument to entitlement. Every plank we set, every rope we tied, every hay bale we stacked, I imagined it in motion, soaring through the air like poetic justice. By evening, we had a rudimentary but terrifying machine standing in the far corner of the field. It looked ridiculous, like something out of a Renaissance fair gone wrong. But in my mind, it was perfect. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow, and looked at the SUV in the distance. Karen was inside, humming a little tune, oblivious. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the beginning of something that would finally make her think twice before crossing my property again. But as I admired the catapult, a thought crept in. What if it doesn't work? What if it collapses mid-launch? What if Karen sees me before we're ready? Worse, what if we miscalculate and, well, let's just say property damage of an even bigger kind? I shook my head, trying to push the doubts away. No, too late for second guessing. We had come this far, there was no turning back. Earl leaned against a post, grinning like a man who had just invented a new kind of trouble. You know, he said, if this works, you're going to be a legend. If it fails, well, at least it'll be entertaining. I smirked. Either way, I said, Karen's about to learn a lesson she won't forget. Just as we finished securing the last rope, I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of gravel under tires. My pulse jumped. Karen, she had returned, earlier than expected, and she was walking toward the SUV, clipboard in hand, just staring at the field like she was inspecting some invisible crime scene. I froze. Every instinct screamed that she could ruin everything if she saw the catapult now. Earl nudged me. She sees it. I swallowed hard. My mind raced. There was no time. We either had to act fast or risk being caught before the plan even began. I looked at the SUV, the sun glinting off its polished surface, and whispered to myself, "Just a little longer, Karen. Just one more day." Karen stopped at the edge of the field and turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. And at that moment, I realized she might be smarter and more dangerous than I thought. By the next morning, I barely slept. Every creak of the barn, every rustle in the fields made me jump. Earl arrived bright and early, already grinning like a kid about to set off fireworks. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, trying to look calm, but my stomach was doing flips. "Let's do this." We wheeled the catapult into position, hidden behind a row of hay bales so Karen wouldn't see us from the driveway. My hands shook as I loaded the first projectile, a massive hay bale, tightly bound and heavier than it looked. "First test," I muttered. "If this works, we might just send a message." Earl tightened the ropes, double-checked the angles, and whispered, "Remember, aim small, miss small." I wanted to laugh, but there was no time. The crunch of tires on gravel froze us both. Karen, of course, she was back, earlier than either of us expected. She had parked her SUV smack in the middle of my driveway, perfectly aligned for maximum chaos, clipboard raised like she was about to inspect my soul. I swallowed hard. This was it. I could see the gleam in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming. And I felt a mix of excitement and terror. One wrong move and everything would go sideways. Earl looked at me. "You ready?" I nodded, my voice caught. "Let's do it." We pulled the release cord. The catapult groaned under the strain, the hay bale rocking back and forth as if hesitating, and then, whoosh. It shot forward, flying across the field in a graceful, terrifying arc. Karen froze. She looked up, her eyes widened. And then the bale slammed into the ground, just shy of the SUV. Dirt exploded like fireworks, hay flew everywhere, and for a second I thought she would faint. But no, Karen's glare sharpened. She stomped toward us, clipboard clutched like a battle standard. "What the hell is this?" she shouted. "This is property destruction. I'm calling the police." I grinned nervously. "Test shot," I said. "Nothing personal." She narrowed her eyes. "You." Before she could finish, we loaded a smaller hay bale, just for calibration, and aimed again. This one sailed perfectly, bouncing just beside the SUV, kicking up dirt and making her jump back. "Oh my God," she screamed. "Do you realize what you're doing?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep calm, "and yes, I do." I couldn't help but laugh a little. Her face was priceless. Anger, shock, confusion, and panic all rolled into one. It was the perfect storm. But then something unexpected happened. Karen, furious and fearless, started moving toward the SUV. She wasn't running away. She wasn't hiding. She was calculating, plotting. I could see it in the way she tilted her head, scanning the field like a general assessing the battlefield. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just a nuisance anymore, she was a threat. And she had no intention of letting this ridiculous catapult plan stop her. Earl glanced at me, eyebrows raised. She's coming." I froze, realizing something terrifying. If she got close enough, she could destroy the catapult. Or worse, call the cops before we even launched for real. I had to make a decision fast. One wrong move, and all our preparation, all our planning would be wasted. And Karen, she would walk away victorious, smug as ever, thinking she had beaten me. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and whispered to Earl, "We go big, now or never." Earl nodded grimly. "You sure?" I clenched my fists. "Positive." I grabbed the largest hay bale we had, loaded it onto the catapult, and aimed as precisely as I could. The sun glinted off Karen's SUV in the distance, her eyes narrowing as she realized we were serious this time. 3, 2, 1, I muttered. We pulled the release cord. The catapult creaked and groaned, rope straining, wood bending slightly under the pressure, and then the hay bale launched, soaring like it had wings. Karen screamed. I held my breath. Earl's face was pale. The bale sailed through the air, time seemed to slow, and landed with a tremendous crash. Dirt, hay, and small debris exploded everywhere. Dust filled the air, and when it cleared, I could see Karen, standing frozen, staring at the SUV. Something had shifted. Something had definitely changed. But I couldn't see exactly what. As I stepped closer through the dust, trying to see the result of our big move, I realized something terrifying. The SUV had moved in ways I didn't expect. And Karen, she was no longer standing alone. The morning air was thick with dust, tension, and the faint smell of hay. My hands were still shaking from the last test, and Earl looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We were ready, or at least as ready as two farmers with a medieval catapult could be. Karen was there, of course. She had moved closer, clipboard still in hand, muttering something about illegal activity and criminal negligence. But this time, she didn't just watch. No, she was packing, her heels digging into the gravel, her glare sharp enough to split a fence post. She thought she had control. She didn't know how wrong she was. We loaded the first projectile, the largest hay bale we had, heavy enough to make a statement but hopefully not enough to ruin property permanently. I took a deep breath, checking the angle one last time. Earl nodded. His hands were steady, but I could see the excitement bubbling under his stoic exterior. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. We pulled the release cord. The catapult groaned under the strain, wood creaking ominously, ropes straining to their limits. The bale soared through the air, a perfect arc against the morning sun. Dust erupted where it landed, and for a split second, everything was silent. Then Karen screamed. I froze, my stomach lurched. Had we miscalculated? But when the dust settled, I saw it. The bale had struck the SUV. Not destructively, not yet, but it jolted the vehicle slightly, enough to nudge it backward like a warning shot. Karen staggered back, wide-eyed, muttering something about, "This is property destruction." I swallowed a laugh, trying to look innocent. "Just a test," I said, though my grin probably gave me away. Karen recovered quickly. She stomped forward, hands flailing like a storm cloud about to crash. "You think this scares me? I'll call the authorities, I'll..." Before she could finish, we were already loading the second bale. Bigger, heavier, aimed with more precision. I glanced at Earl. He gave me a nod that said, "We've come too far to stop now." I pulled the release cord again. The catapult groaned even louder this time, as if protesting its own existence. And then, the bale shot forward with terrifying speed. Time seemed to slow. Karen froze mid-step. The bale soared higher than before, then plummeted straight toward the SUV. I closed my eyes, hard in my throat. Impact. A loud crash. Dirt and hay exploded everywhere. When I opened my eyes, the SUV had shifted noticeably, tilted forward, and one wheel was slightly sunk into the soft ground. Karen shrieked, spinning around, pointing at us, and shouting a string of words I couldn't entirely process. Earl and I exchanged a glance. Adrenaline surged. Victory, sweet and ridiculous, tasted like dust and hay in my mouth. But then I noticed something terrifying. Karen wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was glaring, calculating, moving toward the SUV with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. Her heels dug into the gravel like anchors, and she muttered something about, "This isn't over." My pulse spiked. She was unpredictable, dangerous. And right now, she was angry in a way that made me realize this could get much worse. I glanced at the catapult. It had taken all our strength to load that last bale. If we wanted to escalate further, we would have to risk the machine and maybe even ourselves. But every instinct screamed at me, this is it. One more push, one more calculated move, and Karen would finally get the message. I nodded to Earl. "Final round," I whispered. He didn't hesitate. We worked quickly, silently, a tense rhythm that made every second feel like an eternity. The last bale was loaded, ropes taut, wood creaking. Karen was muttering furiously, packing near the SUV, unaware or maybe ignoring what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it, no turning back. We pulled the release cord. The catapult groaned and screamed under pressure. The hay bale shot into the air like a missile, spinning, flying, impossibly fast. Dust kicked up, the ground trembled, and for a moment it felt like the whole farm was holding its breath. The bale hit. The SUV lurched violently, tires spinning, one corner sinking into the dirt. Karen screamed, flailing at the wheel, eyes wide with horror. Dirt flew, hay exploded like fireworks, and I swear for a split second time froze. When the dust cleared, Karen's SUV was no longer perfectly parked. It had moved, a small but noticeable shift. And Karen herself, staggering back, clutching her clipboard, rage and disbelief, contorting her face into something almost human. I wiped sweat from my brow and whispered to Earl, almost in disbelief. It worked. Earl grinned. Oh, it worked, trust me, worked better than I imagined. But as we watched Karen, I realized something chilling. She wasn't finished. Her glare was sharper, her movements faster. She was already plotting her next move. And one thing was clear, this war was far from over. Just as I started to relax, I heard a new sound, a siren in the distance. The sheriff, called by Karen, was coming, and I knew, deep down, this was about to get even messier. I didn't have time to celebrate. The distant wail of a siren grew louder, cutting through the morning air like a warning bell. My heart dropped. The sheriff, Karen had called him. Earl and I froze for a second, staring at the SUV and the mess around it. Dirt scattered everywhere, hay strewn across the driveway, and Karen standing beside it, clipboard in hand, flailing like she was trying to summon reinforcements with sheer rage alone. When the sheriff pulled up, lights off, thank God, he got out slowly, surveying the chaos. He didn't rush toward us. He didn't shout. He just looked at the catapult, the SUV, Karen, and then back at us, blinking like he had accidentally stumbled onto a scene from a low-budget action movie. All right, he said slowly, voice calm but heavy. Somebody tell me exactly what's going on here. Karen wasted no time. She started screaming. This man, she pointed at me, has launched projectiles at my vehicle. My property, this is criminal, you should arrest him. He's. I raised my hands, trying not to grin too much. Sheriff, she's been trespassing for weeks, I said. Parking her SUV on my land, writing fake fines, harassing me every day. This was a warning, a message. The sheriff looked at me, then at Karen, and then at the catapult. He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. You built a medieval catapult on your property. Earl shrugged. We followed all safety guidelines mostly. Karen's face turned red. This isn't funny, she's joking. Look at my SUV. I walked over slowly, gesturing toward the vehicle. Dirt had caked one tire. The SUV was slightly tilted in the soft earth. Karen stared at it like someone had just defiled the Mona Lisa. The sheriff scratched his head, still looking at the catapult. All right, let's see, the vehicle, is it drivable? Yes, I said carefully, but I think it'll teach a lesson about property boundaries. Karen screamed again. This is ridiculous, I'm a member of the HOA, you can't just. The sheriff held up a hand. Ma'am, are you aware you've been trespassing? Her face froze, the words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Trespassing, she repeated, as if the concept was completely foreign. I swallowed a grin. Yes, trespassing on private land, repeatedly, on record. The sheriff nodded. Oh, that changes things. I could see Karen's confidence faltering for the first time. She shuffled her feet, looking around, muttering under her breath about this isn't legal, community rights, and how dare he. The sheriff finally shook his head. All right, no arrests today, no citations, but this is the last time anyone does anything like this. And you, he pointed at Karen, you're leaving. Karen's face went pale. Leaving. Yes, he said firmly. Your little HOA empire is over. You've been trespassing, harassing property owners, and creating chaos. Pack your SUV and go. Karen looked at me, eyes burning with fury and disbelief. I smiled politely. Enjoy the drive home, I said. She stomped toward the SUV, muttering threats under her breath, climbed in, and backed out of the driveway with an expression that said she had never been defeated so thoroughly in her life. Once she was gone, Earl and I collapsed against the catapult, laughing nervously. The adrenaline finally started to fade, leaving a strange combination of relief, exhaustion, and pride. "You think she'll come back?" Earl asked, wiping dirt from his hands. I shrugged. "Not for a while. She's probably calling lawyers, friends, anyone who will listen, but for today she's gone." The sheriff lingered a moment, shaking his head. "You boys, you're lucky. This could have gone much worse," but he gave a small smile. I can't deny that was impressive, in a chaotic, slightly illegal sort of way. I laughed. "Thanks, Sheriff, just trying to keep the farm safe." He shook his head again, climbed into his cruiser, and drove off. The air seemed quieter somehow. The SUV was gone. Karen's clipboard was gone, and the field, though messy, finally felt like my land again. I looked at Earl, and we both burst into laughter. Relief, joy, disbelief, all tangled together. It had worked. It had really worked. And as I gazed at the dented driveway, the scattered hay, and the ruined perfection of Karen's vision of authority, I realized something important. Sometimes, ridiculous ideas are the only ideas that work. I smiled, thinking about the next day, the quiet farm, and the strange satisfaction of victory. But deep down, I knew this was a story I'd tell for years, and maybe, just maybe, I'd have to prepare for the next Karen. The morning after Karen finally drove off, the farm felt quiet, too quiet. For a week, every sound had been punctuated by her presence. The crunch of tires, the scribble of her clipboard, the muttered threats. Now nothing, just birds, horses, and the occasional creak of the barn. I walked through the driveway, surveying the aftermath. Dirt was strewn everywhere, hay lay scattered like confetti after a parade, and the catapult, my ridiculous, terrifying masterpiece, stood proud in the corner of the field. Earl gave me a thumbs up, his grin wide, covered in splinters and sawdust. "Think we went too far?" he asked, still chuckling. I shook my head. "No, we went exactly far enough." The SUV was gone, the driveway reclaimed, and my farm finally felt like mine again. But the victory wasn't just about the SUV or the mess. It was about freedom, about boundaries, about showing someone that no matter how confident or official they think they are, there are limits you simply cannot cross. I stepped back, hands on my hips, and laughed softly. I couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all, the catapult, the hay bales, Karen's outrage, was too much not to laugh. I imagined telling this story at a town gathering someday. People would stare, maybe think I was crazy. And maybe I was, but it worked. I looked at the catapult again. Its ropes were frayed, wood slightly bent but still standing. I ran a hand along the smooth edge of the launching arm. A ridiculous weapon, yes, but also a symbol. A symbol that if someone tries to control your life unfairly, sometimes the only way to reclaim it is with a little creativity and a lot of audacity. Earl clapped me on the shoulder. "So, what now?" I grinned. "Now we clean up, and then maybe we get a bigger catapult, just in case the next Karen shows up." He laughed. "You're serious?" "Completely," I said, smirking. "Rule number 1 of farm defense, always be ready for chaos." Later, as I walked through the fields, I noticed the horses grazing calmly. The chickens wandered freely, pecking at the dirt like nothing had happened. The sun glinted off the barn roof, the same roof Karen claimed was non-compliant, and I felt a swell of pride. This was home, my home, and no clipboard-wielding tyrant was going to change that. I thought about Karen, driving away in her SUV, muttering threats under her breath, probably calling lawyers, plotting revenge, imagining ways to reclaim her HOA empire. And somewhere deep down, I couldn't help but smile. Let her plan. Let her worry. Because today she had learned a lesson. A few days later, I got a call from the local paper. Apparently, someone had seen the chaos from the road and called in a story. They wanted an interview. I laughed. "Sure," I said, "but only if you promise to include the catapult." The article ran with the headline, "Farmer Fights HOA Tyrant with Medieval Weaponry." I couldn't have scripted it better myself. Friends called, neighbors laughed, and I finally felt victorious. Not just over Karen, but over the absurdity, the stress, and the sheer ridiculousness of the past week. And yet, I knew the farm would never be completely quiet. Another Karen might appear someday. Another SUV might try to park where it doesn't belong. Another battle might be brewing just beyond the horizon. And when that day comes, well, let's just say the catapult isn't going anywhere. I took a deep breath, letting the morning air fill my lungs. Life on the farm had returned to normal, or as normal as it could ever be. Horses, chickens, and the occasional creative chaos. And me, standing tall, knowing that sometimes the best way to protect your home is to embrace a little madness. So here's the moral, simple and clear. Patience is good, reasoning is better, but sometimes you have to get creative. You have to build, plan, and aim. And if the circumstances demand it, you might even have to launch a hay bale at someone's SUV. I smiled to myself, stepping back into the barn. My farm was safe. Karen was gone, and I had never felt more alive, more clever, or more ridiculously satisfied in my life. As I glanced out over the fields, I whispered, "Next time, Karen, next time you'll know better." And with that, I walked toward the barn, the sun warming my back, the chickens pecking at my feet, and the catapult, my wild, absurd, perfect creation, standing proudly in the corner, ready for whatever chaos came next. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.